go into probably the most loaded division in the NFL, which is the AFC North. And last year, division winner, the Bengals, they went in there, they beat the Bills, and then they faced the Chiefs, another historic AFC Championship appearance. Chiefs finally got the best of them, winning, moving on to the Super Bowl. But a lot of issues with the Bengals last year was their offensive line. Got some injuries with Jamar Chase. This year, it looks like they're still poised to be the top dog in that division. But you got some Joe Mixon issues off the field. You got Jamar Chase issues off the field. Joe Burrow had an injury in the preseason. Looks like he'll be ready to go for week 1. But those are some of the concerns going there. Their defense still looks like it's going to be pretty solid. They did lose Jesse Bates in the offseason. But overall, they should still be right there at the end of it.
Yeah, I think they will be right there at the end of it because last year they spent a bunch of money on the offensive line. Didn't really pan out, and they still had, I believe, 3 of their 5 starters were injured in that conference championship game versus the Chiefs. However, Joe Burrow officially cemented himself above Josh Allen, which I was saying and banging my fist on the table all of last year that Joe Burrow is clearly better than Josh Allen. He's better at playing the quarterback position, and he's more of a killer that can look Patrick Mahomes in the eye and say, "Not today, sir." And he's been the only quarterback besides Tom Brady who's been able to do that, which is insane. Lou Anarumo still coaching that defense. He was someone last year, came up with a brilliant plan versus the Bills, came up with a brilliant plan in the first time they played the Chiefs in the conference championship where they completely flipped their defense in the second half and were able to overcome that 21 to, I believe, 3 deficit versus the Chiefs. So I still think they're the team to beat in that division. They have the best 3 wide receivers in Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase, and they have to recognize, are we going to be able to pay T. Higgins? Probably not. So let's make the most of it this year. Still think the Bengals are going to be right there with everyone else in the Super Bowl conversation. I think the offensive line is that key because in the conference championship last year, it was an issue with Joe Burrow having time, even though he has the fastest release, I believe, in the league. He has that Tom Brady ability to just read the defense, know exactly where he's going to go with the football, pick you apart. So I think the Bengals this year, it's their time to win a Super Bowl, and I think that offensive line is really the key. But they did add, I believe it's Orlando Brown at left tackle. So I think that's going to help Joe Burrow tremendously, and it'll open up the run game.
Yeah, absolutely. And then other teams in this division here, the Ravens, they made a lot of moves this offseason.
They did.
They signed Odell. They drafted Zay Flowers, so I'm super high on. I think he's going to be really great.
Juke stick
Flowers, yep. They got a new offensive coordinator, so how will they be? Looks like they're going to be more pass heavy, rely more on the passing abilities of Lamar Jackson. I'm actually pretty high on their offense compared to last year. Last year, I wasn't super in love with their weapons, but now you get Zay Flowers, who I think is going to be really good for him. Probably his first true dynamic receiver, better than Hollywood. And then Rashad Bateman, how will he be? Odell, if he can stay healthy, I think he'll be a formidable 2 for him. Mark Andrews, one of the best tight ends in football. Good offensive line. You have John Harbaugh there. He's been fantastic for him. And then that defense has got everybody they need there.
Yeah. No, they have one of the most loaded defenses in the NFL. Kyle Hamilton was ranked pretty high at safety. I believe he was a top 5 safety last year for Pro Football Focus's rating. Then you still have some incredible corners on that team. You still have McQueen there at linebacker. And then you have an incredible defensive line. You just have to really pull it together this year. John Harbaugh has to be an actual coach this year and not just an analytics machine. But I think bringing in a new offensive coordinator who typically runs 3 wide receiver sets, where the Ravens were very 2 receivers, 2 tight ends playing big smash mouth football, which is great. But Lamar Jackson, to save some longevity and to prevent injuries, really needs to start to learn to rely on his arm. And then running really has to be the luxury of that offense. But I have questions with Odell staying healthy, relying on a rookie wide receiver. And then Mark Andrews got hurt last year, which is very concerning for me, especially for a tight end who's starting to get up there in age and has had a lot of targets and has been kind of really a bell cow for that offense since they haven't had any good wide receivers in a long time.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a team that has a lot of injury risk going into the season. You worry about Lamar, who's been banged up twice this past 2 years. You have the Mark Andrews. You have Odell, who hasn't played in basically 2 years at this point.
Yeah.
And then the rookie wide receiver, I think he'll be great. But also on the defensive side, you do have some older players there too. So a lot of injury risk. If they can keep it all together and, get a little bit of luck there, not getting hurt, they should still be in the mix and be a playoff team.
Well, last year, if Lamar played, I hate to say it, but they probably would have beat the Bengals in that game.
Probably.
Because the Bengals, they had offensive line issues. Their defense was able to slow the Bengals down. They're going at them with the backup quarterback. But again, it does come down to the health of Lamar Jackson, because last year he was hurt. The year before that, he was hurt, and we're relying on these backup quarterbacks. And we've really just been getting 8 to 10 games each year from Lamar Jackson. So the health of Lamar has to be a main focal point for that offense. And I think that offensive line has been really good in the past, but that's also, I feel like, another question mark for the Ravens this year.
For sure. And then not only that, you have a team like
the Steelers.
Pittsburgh Steelers, who last year started the season, they started Mitch Trubisky, and they looked their offense was pretty abysmal. I mean, you could compare it to the Broncos in the early half of the season. Then Kenny Pickett steps in, starts off a little clunky, but towards the end of the season, played very well. For the Steelers, you got a team that their biggest hole was offensive line. They addressed it in the draft this year, getting the top-ranked tackle. And then defense, they got this guy, maybe you've heard of him, TJ Watt, Defensive Player of the Year. They signed Patrick Peterson, still got a little left in the juice there. And then they also have these wide receivers. Maybe you've heard of him, George Pickens. That guy that, does one-handed catches like it's nothing.
Yeah.
It has Deontay Johnson, Pat Freiermuth. Najee Harris doesn't have a screw in his foot this year. They got Jalen Warren. So the Steelers, despite the fact that they had a pretty clunky start to the season last year, finished hot, almost made the playoffs, 9-8, maintained that winning record. So Steelers, for a formidable organization, they should be a team you can't just look past.
Yeah, and I think with the Steelers this year, they were a team that was making a push for the playoffs last year. Kenny Pickett really started to come on at the end of the year. A quarterback starts to come on when you hear Chris Collinsworth go, wow, I just love this guy's arm angles and the way he's able to throw the football at all these different ways and get it out to his guys. It's something beautiful to see. When Collinsworth starts talking about that, and you're like, okay, Steelers know a thing or two about drafting wide receivers. We can go down a list, but everyone is familiar with Antonio Brown. They drafted Emmanuel Sanders. Martavis Bryant was even pretty good. And then, who is that guy with Ben Roethlisberger that they had for a long time? Hines Ward, named after the stadium. So you knew he was an automatic hit there. So I think addressing the offensive line, Najee Harris, not having a screw in his foot. And I think he's going to be a guy who burned a lot of people in fantasy last year. So people are kind of down on him this year. But last year, he started to come on at the end of the year with Jalen Warren, who was really coming on. And that's a dynamic, physical running duo, which is going to win you a lot of games November, December, and January when it starts to get cold. And then Pickens now has that athletic ability to move through traffic, absorb the contact, and then take it to the house. And that, I think, is something that the Steelers offense has been missing since Antonio Brown. And then the health of TJ Watt is something he addressed in the offseason, where he's like, all right, I'm working with the physical therapist, new trainer, new diet to work on preventing injuries and staying healthy, because he will win you close games on his own. If it's within a one possession game, TJ Watt is the guy that'll disrupt the quarterback in the backfield, get to someone like a Joe Burrow or Lamar Jackson, strip the football, get a fumble, bat a pass in the air so you get an interception there. So I think the defense is going to be good. You came on strong last year with Kenny Pickett and Mike Tomlin. You know what LeVar Ball says with one-on-one, never lost. Mike Tomlin has never had a losing season, and I don't think it's going to start now. So I think if Joe Burrow's health is a question, Lamar's health is a question, Deshaun Watson is kind of a question right now for people. The Steelers are going to be that surprise team that if Kenny Pickett can just be Matt Ryan, who has won an MVP in his career and just gives you that level of production, that's all you need him to be. And the roster is loaded.
Yeah, 100%. And then lastly, the Browns, who on paper have arguably the best roster in the NFL. You have a great D-line, you have great corners, you have a great offensive line, pretty good receivers with Amari Cooper. They drafted a wide receiver this year as well. They have Nick Chubb, best running back in football. Deshaun Watson.
In football, wow.
They do. Pro Football Reference here. And then Deshaun Watson, who a couple of years removed from his great times in Houston, had that massive scandal that kind of paraded over him last year. This is his first full season with the Browns. How will he be? A lot of question marks here. If they play to their full potential, they should be right in the mix. But if they do the typical Browns fashion, they'll probably finish last.
Yeah, and I don't think by any means they'll finish last because you have Kevin Stefanski, who's won a Coach of the Year in his career. Deshaun Watson has the ability to be the best quarterback in that division because I think even at his best, I think he's right there with Joe Burrow and the best of them in the league besides Mahomes. So I think with Deshaun Watson, he's really the big question mark. Struggled a little bit last year finding his rhythm, had to go through a lot of situations, court cases. I think mentally that has to wear on you at some point. The media is not talking about that at all this year. They're just talking about Deshaun Watson, the football player, which I think will help him out a lot. And then he never had a great running back in Houston. I think his best running back was like the Lamar Millers of the world. He was past Arian Foster's time. And then Myles Garrett is still an absolute monster. He's someone who wants to really put himself in that defensive player of the year conversation. And then you have Amari Cooper, went out there and got Elijah Moore. Donovan Peoples-Jones is just one of those receivers he'll never be the best receiver, but every time you see him play, it's like, okay.
He's like a Tyler Lockett.
It's kind of nice. And then I think David Njoku is also probably going to be the best tight end Deshaun Watson has had, and I think he's going to love throwing him the ball.
Yeah.
So I think it's a division where it's like, hey, all of you are loaded. So it's really going to come down to the health and how Deshaun Watson performs and the health of Lamar, Joe Burrow, and the Cincinnati offensive line, and then how good Kenny Pickett can be in big game moments going up against those high-level defenses.